Today's video is about patterns in a text, and this is all part of your knowledge building for understanding how texts of particular genres or subject areas, academic texts in particular, have their own characteristics, and we are looking at the different dimensions of characteristics, and we're following this concept of patterns. Texts can be identified by lexical patterns, that is to say that there are certain consistencies of reoccurring vocabulary, which, as you would expect, depending upon the topic, that's what you're going to get. Reoccurring grammatical patterns, use of passives, the absence of interrogatives, the use of causatives, make something happen. As an example of a causative, X makes Y happen, and you might find that in science textbooks. We find patterns at the paragraph level. That is to say that within a given text, you are going to see a consistency in the structure of paragraphs. Like all the topic sentences of a paragraph are going to be of one grammatical type. That is to say, straightforward subject, verb, direct object, subject, verb, indirect object. The next sentence might be built around the passive, so forth and so on. A good example of that is going to be the supporting paragraphs of a 5-paragraph essay, where we tend to see the same kind of formula being applied. I think public school teachers, I've heard the word format being used. What's the format of this paragraph? Basically, how are that's basically a discourse level formatting. That is to say that the grammar is organized in subsequent sentences, from one sentence to the next in a particular way. And then you can get at much larger, like whole sections, and you might find patterns of consistency there. So we're going to keep things down below the sentence level today, just to tune your awareness to this concept. Actually, it's a group of concepts by a fellow called Sinclair. And Sinclair was a corpus linguist who came up with a couple of very important principles that are bandied about in linguistic circles to explain the mental processes that people use when using language. And I will be referring to this in one of my future videos or other videos as the idiom principle and the open choice principle. The open choice principle basically is this concept of grammar, that is to say the rules of assembly of a sentence, of open-ended slots, where you insert any verb here, and following that verb insert any noun. So you can have I like, insert your favorite noun here, bananas, carrots, things you tend to eat, things you tend to like to do, etc., etc. And our ability to to insert pretty much anything we want without having any forced groups of words. I like electrical transformers. We can say things completely off the cuff, completely out of context. They are non sequiturs, but our linguistic ability to do that speaks to the open choice principle. Okay. The idiom principle says that, well, you can't just insert any noun after any particular verb. Depending upon the verb you use, there is a narrowed subset of nouns that you are likely to use, or in the case of a more complex sentence, there's a variety of grammatical structures that can happen after a verb, like a prepositional phrase, depending upon whether the verb is transitive or intransitive. And when people speak idiomatically, that is because they are using a part of their language capacity to select groups of words and linguistic patterns that a speech community tends to use all the time. And so in one way it identifies a member of a particular speech community, of a dialect, if you will, because of the word choices and grammatical choices that they use follow a certain cultural pattern or preference. So we're going to talk about collocation, colligation, semantic preference, and semantic prosody today as the concepts that Sinclair talks about in his book called Trust the Text, which I think came out in 1990 or 91. And then I'm also going to introduce this concept of lexical bundles, pardon me, and that will segue into the next video. All right, so many of you have heard about collocations, but I bet many of you have not heard about colligation, semantic preference, and semantic prosody. This is seen very frequently in a lot of public school. It's found its way down into teacher training manuals, but less frequently, if at all, you are going to encounter these. But they are all part of what Sinclair talks about as typical axes or pivot points of patterning in a text. So we'll talk about each one in turn. All right, collocations. We're all familiar with that. Basically, they're referred to in layman speak as word neighbors. Okay, and that, so if we use a particular word, for example, the word boy, that there's a likelihood of a particular adjective that is going to be used with that word. And handsome boy, smart boy, ugly boy, lazy boy. Those are common collocations. Collocations means loc, meaning in the place, and so it's words that are in the same place as other words. Okay, and it's kind of important that you don't switch on the meaning-making part of your brain. All you're really doing is just looking at word forms, and try to switch off the desire to make meaning. Because in your analysis, you're just going to look at these shapes that happen to make up the word morning, and you are going to look at the shapes that happen to occur next to it, and you're going to go, look, the word early in this particular text that I have, this sample of phrases, the word early collocates with the word morning twice. And in fact, in our common usage, that is no surprise. Okay. Equally no surprise, the word commute is going to collocate with the word morning. Okay. And then we have the word call, which also collocates with the word morning. So the question is, in your day-to-day experience, which of these two words is more likely to collocate with the word morning in your day-to-day experience? Okay. If you live on a military base and you've got reveille, or you're living in some bubble somewhere and where other people get you out of bed, then morning call is going to be the thing that's more likely that you're going to have a collocation of. Whereas for those of you or us who drive from A to B in the morning as part of your daily experience, well, in that particular speech community, you are going to have the word commute that collocates. Okay, so we talk about collocations in terms of strength, that there are some things, some words or word forms that collocate more or less comparatively than others. Colligation. Colligation, if we look at the word root, lig having to do with tie or bind. Basically, we're talking about grammar here. Okay, the grammar is the glue that binds words to other words, and so we're talking about the grammar that occurs with the word in question. And here's the classic example that Sinclair uses: the word budge. Now, in an ESL classroom, I will say, hey guys, here's the word budge, and most intermediate and even advanced learners will know the word budge. They're like, yeah, I know the word budge. And I say, to what extent do you know the word budge? And they're like, yeah, it means to move. I say, great, use it in a sentence. And inevitably, majority of them are going to create a grammatically correct sentence, but idiomatically incorrect sentence, because they're going to use it in the positive. Okay, I tried to budget. All right, and when we talk about groups of speakers and the tendencies that groups of speakers have, what we find from native speakers, this is a more likely colligation from native speakers, that the word budge tends to have a negative nearby. You ask anybody on the street, use the word budge in a sentence, and I guarantee if it's a sample of native speakers, 99% of them, if not more, are going to use that word budge, and they are going to have a negative very nearby with a modal. Okay? Whereas non-natives, you're going to find an equal distribution or even a skewed distribution of non-native speakers some are going to use it in the positive, some might use it in the negative, which is more target-like, but you're going to find other people who don't. And we would say that the non-natives do not have a command of the colligation, that is to say the grammatical patterning associated with the word budge. Okay? So this is in fact a part of lexical knowledge. A lot of people would call it grammatical knowledge, but no. The fact of the matter is that if you truly know this word, then you know the grammar that goes with it. Okay? It's not a grammar rule that you're going to be teaching, because of course they know how to form the negative, but what they haven't learned is the lexical point of associating negative with this particular lexical item. And basically this changed the concept of grammar for me, because I soon realized that, well, every word has this set of grammatical patterns that it is and is not associated with. Passives, causatives, modals, interrogatives, certain verb tenses or aspects or voice. And basically, it occurred to me that, hey, grammar is lexically conditioned. That is to say, we make grammatical choices as speakers based on the word that's going to convey our idea. You know, and if we think about content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, those are the words that convey our ideas. But when we throw them into a sentence, we have to make decisions about choosing from the grammatical patterns that these words fall in. So this is lexical knowledge in my book. Okay, or it's the interface between lexicon and grammar. Semantic preference. Okay, this is a tricky concept for some who read the book and are thinking about this for the first time. All right, so we have two words that are actually very, very similar. I mean, we can call them synonyms, but they aren't really synonyms. Okay, both involve groups of people working in concert. Okay, and in fact, when you explore synonyms with your students, the question is, well, what kind of semantic preferences do these words have? And the words, the concept of semantic preference really deals with the conceptual domains or the subject areas. Okay, so teams versus crews. Well, the word teams, as we well know and use, tends to be associated with sports. The word crews tends to be associated with the subject or conceptual domain of rescue services, or thematic domain, if you will. And so, you know, as you're reading the newspaper, why don't you pay attention to the use of teams and crews and find out which thematic or conceptual domain this is being used in. Sometimes you see the word teams associated with rescue services, but more frequently you see the word crews. Okay? And we're not talking about absolutes here, and none of this is forcibly absolute. We're talking about tendencies. And what non-natives have to learn, they don't have to learn just the words and what they mean. They have to learn the tendencies of use. Okay? We base our intuitions on language use based on our history of use. And so we have a sense of tendency based on our experience. Non-natives do not have a long history of experience, and therefore they'd have no way of basing their intuitions and therefore making the correct associations. Pardon the noise in the background. There's a lot going on in town today. Semantic prosody. This is another one that I think is difficult, and if I interpret it correctly, this is the way I have been interpreting it for a while. Okay? That is to say, the feelings that the speaker uses when using the word in question. Okay? Some of you might want to throw in the word connotations. And in a way, yeah, that's kind of appropriate because when we talk about connotations, we are talking about the speaker having judgment about something. Okay, the speaker having a particular stance on an idea or a proposition. That is to say, that the speaker is not just communicating a simple set of ideas, but the speaker also has an attitude towards these ideas as well. So in the case of the word budge, okay, the refrigerator wouldn't budge. The facts of the situation are that refrigerator does not move. Plain and simple. Those are the facts. Okay. However, the speaker, when they use the word budge, is expressing frustration. And so the emotional tenor, if you will, of the speaker, when using the phrase, or when using the word budge, is actually, in addition to saying that the refrigerator did not move, is also expressing their personal evaluation on the situation. Okay, so we find that there is a speaker stance, a speaker communicated attitude that's also involved. Lexical bundles. So lexical bundles are little groups of words, okay? And in the terms I've just described, we could say that they are very strong collocations and colligations that often have particular semantic preference and some particular semantic prosody. And when you go on to the next video, where I talk about Byberg, Conrad, and Cortez article, you will see that they have a taxonomy of lexical bundles. And they say, hey, these are some reoccurring patterns of words that in these small groups keep reappearing all over the place, so that there is a very strong collocation. Furthermore, these particular patterns of words are either used in the negative or they're used in the positive, or the negative or the positive is nearby, or there's a modal involved. Okay, and so there's a particular colligation. Okay, and when we use these multi-word units, okay, like vocabulary, like the word budge, but when we use these multi-word units, they are often used in particular knowledge or thematic domains. Okay, conversation between friends versus a textbook of science versus a legal textbook. Okay, and so there are some lexical bundles that tend to be used more often in a legal textbook than they will be in daily conversation between two native speakers. And then semantic prosody, each lexical bundle, like each vocabulary word, is going to have a emotional tenor. That is to say, some judgment by the speaker about the topic, or some absence of judgment. That is to say, objectivity, for example. Anyway, when you see the next video, you will see the Byberg, Conrad, Cortez, and I explain it all. So, why am I talking about all of this? Well, we get back to this notion of patterning and text characteristics. And if a text has a predictable set of linguistic devices, particular grammar choices, particular vocabulary choices, and lexical bundle choices, in a way that a speaker who is practiced in that particular domain, like I am very used to reading linguistic texts, so I am very practiced in that domain. I'm used to reading academic essays and academic papers. I also expect academic papers to be written in a certain way. So I have a relationship with a particular genre of text, and what are the impacts? Well, when a text uses a predictable set of devices, or that is to say a narrow set of devices, well, it doesn't forcibly have to be narrow, but it's at least predictable to the reader, then what you get is something that is very easily processed by the person who's doing the reading, okay? Because they contain enough of the background experience with how the text is organized, with what likely grammatical patterns and lexicon are going to be used, that their brain is not working hard to decode something new. They are merely coasting on their prior experience and extracting the information that they're looking for. And for example, when I'm reading a journal article, I know where to look to find the information I am looking for from when I'm scanning and skimming. Okay? So what happens if a text is completely predictable in structure? And we're talking in structure here. That is to say grammatical structure, linguistic devices, etc. Well, it's accessible to me, but it comes across as dry. All right? Well, then you get to some other textbooks. For example, I was reading a fifth grader's history textbook not long ago, and what we find is that there might be controlled novelty or controlled variety, limited variety of lexicon, limited variety of grammatical structures that are used in sentences. And what you get with a little bit of novelty is something that's more interesting, but what you get with the control is something that's accessible. Okay, so we have a little bit of balance going on here. When you get into an impenetrable text, what are the characteristics of an impenetrable text? Well, when an author wants to make a text impenetrable, they rely on the reader not having experience with the pattern of lexical or grammatical or discourse organizing structures, among other things. Okay, I'm talking purely in structural terms. Okay, so somebody could write something about a topic that I'm familiar with, which could very well be something linguistic. But if they are writing in such a way, let's say I'm reading a non-native's text who's trying to publish their first paper in English, if they are using structures and discourse organization that is not typical of the thing I am used to reading, it's unpredictable to me, and therefore it becomes impenetrable to me. Okay, some authors do that on purpose, as part of they're exploring a theory of creative writing, and it's the relationship between the author, the text, and the reader. So these are also some considerations for you to have when you are looking at text analysis.